There's an economic pattern emerging right now that some analysts are calling the most significant infrastructure build-out in half a century, while others nervously compare it to the dot-com bubble that spectacularly collapsed in the early 2000s. Global AI spending will exceed $330 billion in 2025, climb to $500 billion by the end of 2026, and by 2030 could require approximately $2 trillion annually just to support the infrastructure being constructed today. To put that in perspective, that's more than Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Nvidia, and Google's parent company Alphabet made combined in total revenue during 2024.
This isn't just about one company's sales or one country's trade restrictions. This is about the architecture of global AI development and which nation establishes technological dominance in what many consider the most strategically significant technology of the century. The decisions being made right now about chip exports could determine whether the United States maintains its current AI advantage, whether China closes the gap, or whether Chinese AI capabilities actually surpass American ones within the next few years. What follows is an examination of why these specific chips matter so profoundly, what strategy is supposedly driving current export policies, and why numerous experts believe that strategy fundamentally misunderstands how China's technology development actually works. The engine that powers the race. Think of the global AI competition as a race between two vehicles. The United States and China are each constructing the most capable AI systems possible, funding research programs, building massive data centers, and supporting domestic technology companies. At this stage, China's capabilities may actually equal or in some domains exceed American ones. But a race vehicle is only as capable as its engine, and in AI development, the engine is the computer chip. These aren't ordinary processors. AI chips are specialized silicon wafers packed with billions of microscopic transistors that switch electrical signals on and off in patterns optimized specifically for machine learning calculations. Bundle hundreds of thousands of these chips together in massive data centers, and you create the computational infrastructure necessary to train and operate cutting-edge AI models. The quality and quantity of available chips directly determines how quickly AI systems can be trained, how large and sophisticated those models can become, and how efficiently they can serve predictions to users. China's domestic chip manufacturers, including Huawei and Cambricon, produce respectable AI processors. But American chip designers, particularly Nvidia and AMD, manufacture substantially superior ones. This hardware advantage is what allowed American AI companies to build a significant lead during the 2010s when the current generation of machine learning techniques was being developed. However, because American chip makers freely sold their products to Chinese companies, China was able to remain competitive despite not producing equivalent hardware domestically. Around 2018, American policymakers reached a critical realization. Given the enormous strategic implications of AI development, continuing to provide China with the best available hardware was essentially funding a competitor in what amounts to a technological arms race with profound economic and security implications. The advantages that advanced AI provide span economic competitiveness, military applications, intelligence capabilities, and geopolitical influence. Helping a strategic competitor develop those capabilities made little sense from a national interest perspective. The export controls that changed everything. The policy response came in waves. In 2020, Chinese chip manufacturers were blocked from accessing American-made tools necessary for advanced semiconductor production. Then in 2022, American chip companies were prohibited from selling their most capable processors to Chinese entities. Each restriction was designed to slow Chinese AI development by limiting access to the specialized hardware that powers cutting-edge systems. The impact was substantial and cumulative. With each new generation of chips, American AI systems surged further ahead, while Chinese systems remained constrained by access to older American processors or inferior domestically produced alternatives. Technology policy experts describe this as a boiling the frog strategy. The gap would widen gradually but relentlessly with each hardware generation, making it increasingly difficult for China to compete. These export controls fundamentally changed the competitive landscape, but they came with significant costs for American companies, particularly Nvidia. Just 15 years earlier, Nvidia was primarily designing graphics processors for video gaming when researchers discovered those same chips were extraordinarily well suited for machine learning calculations. That discovery gave NVIDIA an enormous head start when AI development accelerated. By 2023, NVIDIA manufactured over 90% of AI data center processors globally. Before export restrictions took effect, approximately 22% of NVIDIA's revenue came from Chinese sales. After restrictions, that dropped to just 13%. The company was losing billions in potential business to protect American strategic interests. Faced with this situation, NVIDIA found an ingenious workaround that exploited the specific technical language of export regulations. The clever workaround that kept sales flowing. AI chips get evaluated on two primary specifications: raw computational power and interconnect speed, which determines how rapidly chips can communicate with each other when working in coordinated arrays. The 2022 export controls prohibited selling any chip exceeding certain thresholds for these metrics, which included NVIDIA's flagship H100 processor. NVIDIA's response was to take the H100 design and deliberately degrade it, creating a modified version called the H800 that fell just below regulatory limits. Chinese AI companies purchased as many as they could acquire. When regulations tightened further, NVIDIA designed yet another variant called the H20. It wasn't as powerful as unrestricted American chips, but it featured very high interconnect speeds, making it particularly effective for serving trained AI models to millions of users. Exactly what Chinese AI companies needed for commercial deployment. Chinese technology firms bought H20 chips as rapidly as NVIDIA could supply them, and supplemented official purchases with chips acquired through gray market channels. By 2025, largely due to continued access to NVIDIA hardware, Chinese AI companies were demonstrating remarkable progress. When DeepSeek released models claiming performance competitive with American frontier systems while reportedly using less expensive NVIDIA H800 chips, it validated concerns that Chinese AI was advancing faster than many anticipated. The Chinese market was absorbing these chips at maximum available rate because even downgraded NVIDIA processors substantially outperformed domestic alternatives. Whatever the best NVIDIA chips regulations permitted became the chips Chinese AI companies demanded. This created enormous pressure on American policymakers. Continue restricting sales and lose strategic leverage plus billions in commercial revenue, or find some strategic rationale for allowing sales to continue. The addiction strategy and its critical flaw. In April 2025, the H20 was finally blocked from export to China. But instead of designing another workaround chip, NVIDIA's leadership approached government officials with a different argument entirely. Rather than blocking chip sales, the United States should strategically permit them because doing so would create Chinese dependency on American technology that could be exploited later. The logic goes like this. If the H20 represents the best chip available to Chinese developers, they'll choose it over inferior domestic alternatives. If Chinese companies aren't buying domestic chips, Chinese chip manufacturers will struggle to improve their designs because they lack market feedback and revenue to fund research. If the United States continues providing incrementally better chips over time, Chinese AI development will have no choice but to remain dependent on American hardware. They'll become addicted to it. Then, once American AI establishes decisive advantage, the chip supply can be restricted, leaving China stranded with no viable alternatives. This argument apparently proved persuasive. The export ban was reversed, and NVIDIA can now resume H20 sales to China. In fact, there are indications that even more capable chips like the B30 Blackwell processor, which is 12 times more powerful and 11 times faster than the H20, might be approved for export under certain conditions. NVIDIA's stock price surged to record levels when the reversal was announced, and proposed revenue-sharing arrangements could generate billions for government coffers. The addiction strategy sounds plausible in theory, but numerous technology policy experts identify a fundamental flaw in its logic. It assumes the Chinese government will passively allow its domestic chip industry to fall behind and accept long-term dependency on American suppliers. That assumption appears spectacularly wrong. Why China won't take the bait? The Chinese government is investing tens of billions of dollars into domestic semiconductor development through direct subsidies, research funding, and infrastructure investments. It has mandated that domestic AI companies source at least 50% of their chips from Chinese manufacturers, creating guaranteed demand even when those chips aren't technically superior. And China's leadership has explicitly stated that achieving self-sufficiency in advanced semiconductors is a strategic priority regardless of cost. All of this means Chinese chip makers will improve their capabilities regardless of whether they face immediate market competition from NVIDIA. They're being funded not by market forces, but by state industrial policy treating chip development as strategic necessity rather than commercial opportunity. The chips won't match NVIDIA's performance initially, but they'll progress from basically unusable to at least workable relatively quickly given the resources being deployed. Once Chinese chips cross the threshold of being adequate for AI development, not optimal, just adequate, Chinese AI companies will switch to domestic hardware, both because of government mandates and because relying on American suppliers carries obvious strategic vulnerability. At that point, the addiction strategy fails completely. Rather than creating long-term dependency, the H20 and potentially Blackwell chips serve as a bridge allowing China to remain competitive in AI development until domestic chip manufacturing catches up. The current export policy isn't getting China addicted to American chips. It's providing Chinese AI companies with the hardware they need to compete effectively during precisely the period when China's domestic chip industry is developing alternatives. It's helping China execute its strategic roadmap rather than disrupting it. The high-stakes negotiation happening right now. Current developments suggest this chip export question is becoming entangled with broader trade negotiations. China has reportedly instructed its AI companies to avoid purchasing NVIDIA chips, and has claimed that domestic alternatives are now comparable to the H20 in capability. This could represent the Chinese government genuinely pushing for domestic chip adoption, or it could be strategic theater, a pressure tactic designed to make NVIDIA lobby American officials for approval to sell even better chips to preserve market share. If more capable Blackwell-class processors get approved for export to China, expect Chinese AI capabilities to advance dramatically and rapidly. Those chips would allow Chinese researchers to train substantially larger and more sophisticated models, using less time and fewer resources. The computational advantage that currently favors American AI development would largely evaporate. Technology policy experts who study this domain believe we're at a pivotal moment. If Chinese AI systems start releasing models with capabilities matching or exceeding American frontier systems on similar timelines, it will demonstrate that the computational advantage has been squandered. And once that happens, the factors that favor Chinese AI development, massive state investment, huge domestic markets, fewer regulatory constraints on data usage and deployment, could allow China to establish a lead that becomes difficult to reverse. So here's the actual situation. A computer chip called the H20, manufactured by NVIDIA, was blocked from export to China. Then the ban was reversed 3 months later following private discussions between company leadership and government officials. The stated rationale is that selling these chips will create Chinese dependency on American technology that can later be exploited strategically. But that strategy assumes China will allow its domestic chip industry to fall behind and accept long-term reliance on American suppliers, an assumption that appears fundamentally at odds with observed Chinese industrial policy and stated strategic priorities. The more capable Blackwell processors might also be approved for export, which would provide Chinese AI developers with hardware approaching what American companies use for frontier model development. Numerous technology policy experts believe this approach misunderstands how China's technology development works and risks allowing China to close or eliminate the computational advantage that currently favors American AI.
And several will force profound questions about autonomy, consciousness, and what it means to be human when machines can think independently and biology becomes programmable code.